Hi, Steve Prokopchak here. I'm with my friend Dr. Tegan Blackbird. Dr. Blackbird I've known for quite a few years, and he has a private practice in Elizabethtown, Pennsylvania. His practice is called journeytherapy.net. I've asked him to come here today and to do this video for us. We want to talk about some difficult situations that we find in our local church, or we find in our small group, or maybe our house church. So the focus is, how do we come alongside those situations that are a little bit more difficult, or difficult situations that people present to us. So so we want to start out with, our leaders experience some real hard cases sometimes, and aren't, we're not professionals, don't always know where to go with some of those cases. So how would you recommend we help those difficult people that show up at our door?
It's a good question, and as I think about it, Steve, we were talking a few weeks ago about where we want to go. I think a place to start is, if you're going to look at helping people, it's not just compassion. You have to talk about wisdom as well as compassion. It's kind of a two-edged sword. Compassion is that part. I mean, hopefully we're doing what we're doing because we are trying to help people. We care about people. We're trying to show Christ's love to the people that come through our doors. And we should have that, and we need to talk about that. That's the benevolence piece. But there's another piece to it, and it's the wisdom piece, that you want to do it wisely. You want to, if you try to show compassion without the wisdom, it's going to be a train wreck, right? It's going to be, I think of, in the early days, I don't know what it would be, my history's a little off, but I'm thinking like 1920s, 1930s, when you think about the AA, Alcoholics Anonymous thing, and the AA model of treating alcoholism. That's kind of a great picture to start with, is that the alcoholic population, addictions, is really difficult, and people get really stuck. And in the 20s, 30s, mental health professionals were stuck as to, why are we not more effective with this population? And one of the things that was puzzling to them is that their spouses tended to be so mature and so giving and caring and patient and godly, and it was kind of a conundrum. How can they have so much difficulty getting beyond this when they've got such a supportive network infrastructure? And it took a while to figure out that actually part of the problem was their spouses. They're kind, they're patient, they're long-suffering, they're very giving, but in a way that wasn't constructive. And what they realized is that, you have this dynamic where, every addictive personality, or every needy person, is going to seek out, they're going to gravitate towards someone who'll take care of them. So then you start talking about the enabling kind of process. And I don't know how familiar the enabling thing is, but enabling just refers to this dynamic that I'm well-intended, I'm trying to do the right thing, I'm trying to be supportive, but that extra attention I'm giving is having a bottom line effect where it's creating an unnatural and unhealthy environment that actually is absolutely necessary for that addiction to continue. Right. So we wind up making excuses for them, we rescue them, we don't expect them to take responsibility for their lives.
You mentioned the word compassion. Jesus, I think one of the things I've always admired about our Lord was he knew who to have compassion upon. Like he wasn't very compassionate towards the Pharisee. And so he was able to draw those lines, but he truly recognized the needy one, and that perhaps they were sincere in their approach to him. So we get caught sometimes between what is the real need and what is the need being presented. Because oftentimes they come to us and they really are looking to the church for, a financial support, or fill my oil tank, or whatever I think I need, but it really doesn't address the real need in their life. And so I think one of the things that we find is a struggle is people don't know exactly how to identify their need. How do we help them practically at this level help that person, that we don't enable them, and yet we're still compassionate towards them, have the compassion of Christ, but at the same time are helping them to identify what is their true need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and when you're talking about that, that's the wisdom piece I'm talking about. It's not just doing good things for them. It's more complicated than just when someone comes to you with a need, they want something, giving them what they want. Because one of the realities is, and this is that wisdom piece, is knowing that what people want is not necessarily, I'm going to say not typically, what's good for them. And the opposite is true, is what they really need is not necessarily what they're looking for, because they're hurting, they're frustrated. And, when we're hurting, and honestly, I think this is one of the biggest pieces that we bring to the table as caregivers, as mental health professionals, as pastors, as small group leaders, is we need to be able to do this. When they bring something to the table, they're stressed and they're focusing right on this, what's right in front of them. It's the immediate need. It's a financial thing. My wife just kicked me out, or whatever it is. I just got reported to Child Protective Services, whatever that is, and we focus on that immediate need. And one of the big wisdom pieces is being able to step back and see the big picture. And it's that thing, and I can't say that enough, what they're looking for is not necessarily what they really need. And Jesus was so good at that. He was God, for crying out loud. But he was so good and so consistent with that.
Yeah, truly identifying the need of the woman at the well, truly, able to give her a word of knowledge and identify the need. So, yeah,
Can you talk about, when we were talking a few weeks ago, the John 5 thing with the paralytic? You gave that example. That was an awesome picture of exactly this.
I love that picture because the man at the pool of Bethesda, that we were talking about that, and the scripture says he was there 38 years, and he thought his need was just getting to the pool and just getting healed. But then he had this excuse of no one gets me there. And he'd been there long term. 38 years is quite some time. So that was his home. That was his environment. Those were his friends. He obviously was getting fed. He obviously had care there. So his needs, daily provision was there. But the question Jesus asked him was, do you want to be well? And that's the question sometimes we're asking people, and I don't know how to always discern if they want to be well. And he said, well, I want to be well, but I don't have anybody to take me. The provision is not there for me. And what Jesus was probably...
Yeah, I can't walk. I need someone to carry me to the well, and nobody will do it.
What he was really asking was, do you want to not just be healed, but do you want to leave here? Do you want to have to find a home?
Yeah.
Do you want to work to support yourself? Because here, you don't have to do those things. Do you want to be well? But that person that walks in our door, and we're talking about, also we want to hit on boundaries today, but we'd be hard-pressed to say, well, do you want to be well? That is not a question I think that they want to be asked.
So, there's that piece. Does it sound crass or rude or insensitive to say, do you want to be well? But, that's actually what the issue is. And that's part of what wisdom is, when I'm working with people in need, it's all about the relationship. Let's start with that. But part of it is I'm trying to see the big picture and see what do they really need. And part of the wisdom is being able to recognize that. But then the other part of wisdom is just knowing how to communicate that in a way that they can hear and in a way that's helpful, that's edifying for them. So there is that piece that I do want to be able to speak to that. I do want to be able to go beyond the immediacy of what they're looking at. And that's tough sometimes.
It does take a lot of wisdom to be able to perceive that and having the right questions to ask. So maybe you could give us some examples of what is the best way to approach this person where we're not offending them, but at the same time we're getting to maybe what are some of the root issues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I find a lot of times in my work with people, before I can tell them what they don't want to hear, I need to listen and
their story.
And be able to communicate to them what they do want to hear. And I think a lot of times, hopefully what people really want to hear, in the healthier situations anyway, is they need to know that I do care about them. I am understanding them. And it sounds so obvious, but that is a big deal, especially if people are angry or getting upset or getting, defensive. One of the things, and I don't mean this in a manipulative way, but one of the ways to diffuse that, I'll slow it down, and I want to make sure that you know that I am understanding you or trying to understand you. And that's a big piece. And a lot of times I find myself doing a lot more listening than talking. And it just dawns on me when we're looking at that passage from John 5 with Jesus. Jesus did not seem to be a man of many words. He had 2 sentences to this person. The other sentence I thought so much about what you're saying. What was the first question he asked him? Do you want to be well? But the very next thing he said, he did heal them. But then he said, he did heal him. But then he said, take up your mat and walk. Because this guy was just saying, he was speaking to his helplessness. He was saying, I need someone to move me to the well, and I don't have someone to do that. And Jesus' first intervention, I guess, was to heal him, but part of that healing process was to speak to the helplessness and empowering him and telling him, you got to stop doing that, and you need to take responsibility for your life. And that's the piece that often we miss.
That's so good. Speak to us, if you would, about the boundaries, like on our part and on their part. Like we don't want to create a situation where they are our project or the whole church's project and they feel like a project. And we know to keep our sanity, there has to be some sense of boundaries. And of course, they often don't have those same boundaries, or the boundaries that most people who don't express such neediness have. Can you speak to that for us and give us a help in that respect?
Yeah, I'll try. Boundaries is so complicated, but it's so important. When I think of boundaries is something that defines an entity, it defines an area, it defines space. It defines where my property line ends and yours begins. Right. So I don't know, I think a lot of it is, some of the, it speaks to that piece where it's not just that you coming to me, you're looking at what's right in front of your face, but one of my first boundaries is I need to make a distinction between what I need in this interaction and what you need. And I need to be aware of the things, there sometimes are ungodly or selfish or just not effective things in my motivation that I need to keep in check, and that's a boundary for me. I like helping people. I want you to be happy with me. I like giving. I like, fill in the blank. Right. And one of the boundaries is just maintaining a distance and thinking through what is your stuff and what is my stuff and what do you need in all of that. Another part of boundaries is knowing, so there's that piece, the responsibility, also knowing my limitations. And knowing my weaknesses. What are my proclivities, my tendencies? What are things, do I get sucked in too easily? Am I a sucker for, an anxious person or a crying person? I need to keep that in check. And it's easy to miss, but for me, that is one of the boundaries. I need to know what's going on for me. I need to know what's going on for you. And I need to know what the things you do, I can't put it into a sentence, what are the things you do that can push my buttons? Right. So I have to look at how I'm reacting. I need to know my tendencies. What other things come to mind for you? Oh, you talked about, to clarify this, you talked about dealing with unkind people, demanding people, rude people, which gets into almost, because that's a boundary thing, the safety in the interaction. What kinds of things do you deal with there?
Yeah, so if you have someone who's adamant about their need being met and they find the church to be like their social platform, or they want to stand and say something that's inappropriate, or they're always wanting to take the attention of the group away from where it's at onto themselves, that speaks to some of their personality deficit, their insecurity, their lack of identity. And those things really can affect the local church leader, especially if they don't know how to deal with that person who's standing up saying, I want to say something, or they take the small group in a direction that it's unhealthy. So maybe we can help leaders to know how to set that boundary and how to be kind in their demand of attention for themselves.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes there is no way of doing what you need to do, doing what I need to do, that's not going to kind of tick you off. Mm-hmm. It might be upsetting. And so I want to be sensitive to that, but I don't want to be paralyzed by that. Because honestly, some people manipulate that angry edge to get me to be what they want me to get me to be passive or to control the situation. And just because someone's getting annoyed or irritable or upset or offended, that doesn't mean that I did it wrong. That doesn't mean that I'm in the wrong.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm thinking for some reason that Ephesians 4 thing is coming to mind at the beginning of the chapter when Paul says, I, Paul, a prisoner of the Lord, entreat you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling with which you've been called, with all gentleness and wisdom and patience and compassion. It's that kind of peace and showing the unity of the Spirit and the bond of peace. You've got to be able to protect that. And that word, it's an interesting word when he talks about, some translations call it forbearance or tolerance, but there's a certain toughness in that. There's a certain strength. That tolerance is not being bent, not being pushed over. And we've got to be able to do that.
That's awesome. Another issue is that often this person sees the local church or the small group or someone within that group as being their resource, as being, this whole benevolence thing that you mentioned earlier. Yeah. How do we draw the line on that? When is helping hurting, as they say? When is giving not serving them? If someone's hungry, you feed them a meal, but then do you need to feed them the next meal, and the next and the one after that? So help us with a line there with benevolence, finances.
Yeah, and I'm thinking like 3 levels, 3 tiers. And again, rather than just reacting and giving you what you want, I'm thinking this way. I'm thinking, what are we dealing with here? Like the first tier is just, I don't know what we want to call it, just it's situational. Something happened. Something awful happened. And I didn't do anything to deserve it. I'm stuck here and I need help. And call that a good faith tier. And what I think of with that, I don't know if I want to build a doctrine on this, but when the scriptures talk about taking care of your widows and orphans, yes. I don't know that it's limited to just widows and orphans. To me, that picture means these are people through no fault of their own are really hurting, and they do not have the means to help themselves. So whether that's a widow and an orphan or someone else, but the idea is they're hurting and they do not have the means to help themselves.
And it's not their fault.
It is not their fault. It is not a result of something they did.
Tier 1, got it.
So tier 1 is just a good faith tier. It's like no strings attached. I'm not expecting anything from you. Here, you need this, and that's awesome. Tier 2, I don't know what we want to call tier 2, but it's going to involve more shepherding. And here's where, you are hurting, but you're not a widow or orphan. This is the take up your mat and walk. I'm looking at it and I'm seeing that the position you're in right now comes about because of something that you missed or something you did. Mm-hmm. And I find so often with the people that I'm working with, this is that getting past the immediacy of what they're asking for. And this is that piece, that wisdom piece that says what they want and what they need might be 2 different things. Okay. And some of the task, and it's not a confrontational, in-your-face, mean-spirited kind of thing. This is the speaking the truth in love thing that Paul talks about in Ephesians. Some of my task is getting you to look beyond the immediacy of what is stressing you and looking at that big picture. And so some of I don't know, I'm calling this a shepherding tier, but this is saying, I'm not unwilling to help you, but Steve, there's more to the problem than I think you're seeing right now. And there are other pieces to this. And you might not have the giftedness or the experience or the insight to know what those other pieces are. And sometimes you just need to bring someone else in and know when I need to bring someone else in to help me recognize this Steve Prokopchak guy is coming and he's asking for this, but I'm sensing that this is kind of a mess. Something else is going on.
So it sounds like in this second tier, they're needing to identify what do they need to own and what might they be doing that's promoting this?
Yeah. What is their responsibility? And it's kind of like parenting. A good parent, an effective parent, just doesn't give their child what they want every time they scream. You know, we need to be more strategic than that. And so, yeah, some of this, that second tier, that shepherding tier, and here's where I've got to be able to step back, think things through, think big picture, and recognize what is the part that they're missing. And I will tell you, especially the more serious the problems get, people usually are missing something. And the more intense their distress gets, the more likely they are to miss it because they're more focused on their discomfort. And that's a lot of what we bring to the table is, honestly, I'm not experiencing that intensity of discomfort you have, so I should be able to see things without all that emotional interference. And some of my task is to help you recognize that. And that's a compassionate kind of thing. But in that shepherding tier, you know, if I just continue to show kindness without speaking to that, it's not going to go well. It's not going to be effective for you. And I'm going to wind up wasting a lot of resources. Sometimes it's financial, sometimes it's time, sometimes it's emotional energy, but I'm not going to be effective. And so if you're trying to help someone and they're not willing to look at that, that should be kind of a red flag. Because a mature person that is really in a good place and looking for help and they're motivated, my hope is that they would be interested in that. They would find it actually empowering, which is what Jesus talked about, pick up your mat.
Right.
So now the guy is saying, I want to pick up my mat. Okay, now we have a problem that's different, clearly different than the problem you were bringing to me. So, maybe here's where you start talking about tier 3. And I don't know what to call tier 3 other than this is more serious. This isn't just a bump in the road. It's not the level 1 thing. It's not, I'm kind of stuck, I'm teachable, I'm stuck. It's like, okay, tier 3, this is more serious. And I know I'm going to define tier 3 as probably you need to be considering getting some additional help. Through supervision, through a referral to someone in the community, psychiatric care, those kinds of things. When do you do that? Steve, how do you handle that? When do you know when someone needs to be referred? I mean, we've known each other, 35 years, something like that. Yeah. And you've referred a number of people to me. How do you get to the point of recognizing, this...
Yeah, honestly, for me, it's always been I'm probably not being as effective with this person any longer. I'm probably not able to take them where they need to go, or I really don't have the services or the know-how, or it's not that I have any less compassion for the person, but their need is beyond my capability. So that's a piece of your boundary thing that you were talking about. I've got to know what my capabilities are, and I got to know, I also need to be in tune with is compassion ending and frustration is beginning with this person, and irritation with this person. A question that we often have in the local church is that piece of accountability with this person, because lots of times they show up, blow up, and run away to the next, place, and aren't necessarily tuned into, hey, we want to help you, but we want to hold boundaries, and we want to maintain some type of accountability. And people tend to run from accountability and then not stick with the help. What's your recommendation there with that level of helping to hold them accountable to the things that we're talking about and these needs that they're expressing versus what we can do and can't do?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I'm thinking a lot of it is walking with them. A lot of it, you want to show compassion. It is ultimately, it's about the relationship. But the boundaries piece is, I'm still not just going to do what you want me to do because you're going to leave otherwise. That's just not going to end well, and it's not going to be helpful. And let me comment too, I love the way you answer that. When do I refer? And, I think the other thing, you need to be able to recognize what are the signs that this is not a bump in the road, and they're not. So I'm trying to help you, I'm walking with you, I'm giving you stuff, and sometimes people receive it well, but one big thing to look on is they're not changing. They're not being any more effective. They're not doing things differently. They're not moving forward. So, and that's not, like, I don't mean to blame them for that. I think there's, but it is recognizing that a lot of the things that we need to deal with in our lives, we all have them. They don't change easily. I don't know if I've ever told you this, but I've developed with this awareness that we all have something that I call a one thing. Some people have two things. And I get it from the 2 Corinthians 12 thing when Paul talks about his thorn in the flesh. I was given a thorn in the flesh to keep me from exalting myself. And, and he says, I asked the Lord repeatedly that it might be taken from me. And God basically says, no, I'm not going to do it because power is perfected in weakness. And I believe, because I see that, we all have like a one thing. So, and it comes, some of that comes with my own self-awareness. The things that I deal with now as an adult are the same things that were issues for me when I was a kid. Now, hopefully I'm doing a lot better with them. But the stuff you'll see in your 3-year-old, your 4-year-old, and you can see it early on, and you need to be thinking that way. What is their one thing? And this is the thing that's probably going to be with them their whole life. And it's not going to go away really easily. And that's okay, but the hope is that, and I think some of the reason for that is that God uses that to help us grow and to become more dependent on Him and to become more like Him. But you want to be looking for signs of people really being stuck, and it's influencing areas in their lives. They're not seeing it, they're not getting it. Look for signs of real severe emotional dysfunction or distress. And I'm just talking depression, anxiety, OCD, because that stuff can take a long, long time to deal with. And sometimes there are other parts of a treatment, regimen to deal with that. Sometimes it's medication. Sometimes it's a very focused therapy kind of approach. But you may or may not have the resources to deal with that. You may not have the time. And so you got to figure out, every church, every group has to figure out here's the boundaries again. How much energy are we going to put into this stuff? And the other thing you talked about is really good is when I'm finding myself getting frustrated or irritated, and I need to step back and look at, sometimes that's a signal, not just for me, but that's a signal of something going on for you as I'm trying to help you.
So let's say we're at that third tier, and we just want to, I think, finish up what we want to talk about today in this, and that is we're at that third tier, and now we need referral, we need resource. What are we looking for there, and how do we help that person find those resources? What do we do as a local church? Do we just have to be familiar with all the community resources and Christian counselors out there, or what is the process for us if we've reached that third tier, we've done what we know to do for this person, they do need more specialized help?
Unfortunately, that's a really tough question, and for some reason, especially right now, and it seems to be more of an issue post-pandemic, I'm just hearing waiting lists are really, really long. And I know for me, it's hard for me to get someone in within like 4 months or so. And that's a problem, and I'm hearing that kind of wherever you go. But and my suggestion is, I think it'd be good for any church community to be really proactive about developing those kinds of relationships. Gosh, get to know some of the professionals in your community. There are a lot of wacky people out there. I'm sorry, there are. It's just like in any profession. You need to get to know who are the ones you feel comfortable with. You and I have known each other for a long time, but one thing I really like, one church, this goes back 25 years ago. This is the only church I've ever seen do this. They actually had a questionnaire. Before they would refer to someone, they had a questionnaire asking tough questions.
Of the professional.
Of the professional.
Sure.
And it wasn't, I don't know, I think some professionals would kind of be turned off by that, and my suggestion is that's probably all you need to know about them. I thought it was great. And when I'm talking tough questions, I'm talking, how would you handle someone who's coming to you and wants an abortion? What's your position on, like today, the gender fluidity thing is a big deal. What's your position on divorce? How would you handle a situation where you're in marital therapy and they're starting to talk about separation or divorce? And I'm not saying that the answers to any of those questions are easy, but I am suggesting I think it would be good for a church to know where would this professional go with that stuff. And what would be comfortable with this church might be difficult. It might be different than what this church would expect. But I think they're just good questions to ask and get to know them.
I like that response because I think knowing our resources in our community, I love the idea of questioning them. It reminds me of you get a paper that says this is where your politicians stand on these areas. And it helps you, it really would help you. So I think if our local churches would be willing to really look at their resources, find out what they are, maybe make up a questionnaire that could help them.
And can I also add, the other thing, and churches really vary on this too, is to think through as a church, or in the smaller communities as well within Dove, what are your expectations in terms of after I refer to you, what do I want to see happen? And there's no right or wrong with that, but there are a lot, it runs the gamut. There are some churches that just say, I know you, I trust you, I don't need to know anything, I'm referring this person to you, and I wish you well. It's a handoff. Mm-hmm. I don't need any more feedback, I don't need to know. Other churches will say, I don't need specific feedback, but I would want to know if they're following through or if they're not. Some churches will say, I would love to just touch in periodically with the client's permission, with their consent and their awareness. I would love to touch in periodically and get an update, and not just for you, but how are we doing as a church? How can we help you? And I know a lot of professionals, probably most aren't into this, but I personally really enjoy when someone, their accountability person or small group leader, can join us for a session. And I love that. I have found those to be very productive.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it's not just like a squealing on them or just an update, but it's coordinating our efforts. Because the longer I do this, the more I realize how limited I am when I'm meeting with someone once a week, every other week, once a month.
Right.
And we only meet for an hour,
right,
and neat things happen. Sometimes it just feels like that's not enough. And for me personally, I love it if you have a small group leader just periodically come, here's what we're working on, here's what we're doing, mm-hmm, here's what we're struggling with, here's what our goals are. And some of that discussion, and it always becomes that, is what can we do that's constructive? What are the things we are doing that is not helpful.
Correct, yeah.
So we're talking collaboration.
Correct.
And
So-
churches vary, and there's no right or wrong answer. Some churches are like, we don't have the resource to do that.
Right.
But from the handoff to just full collaboration, and then for me personally, I don't know anyone else who does this, but the longer I do this as well, I've realized in my work professionally with my clients how important relationships are, and I'm always just looking for community and social connections. And I am known to reach out. I will initiate and reach out to a church and to a pastor and say, I have someone in your area that needs community, and they would love to have someone meet with them.
Amen. Amen. Well, this has been so good. I just think that piece of helping and connecting to the outside resource, it maintains accountability, it maintains a relationship. We grow as the person's trying to help them, and hopefully they're growing and they're still part of our community. We're not just sending them off and saying good luck. So churches, even resources and with one another is just so very important and vital. Well, thank you. I've been here with Dr. Tegan Blackbird today, licensed psychologist from Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And I've known him many years and appreciate his service. You can find him at journeytherapy.net if you have questions or are looking for a resource. Thank you so much for helping us today. I pray that this is helpful to our leaders that are out there and that they find some resource in this. So.
Yeah, and I could add, Steve, that all of the work that I personally do right now, as you know, is done remotely, meaning over the internet, like Zoom, something like that. And my clients have found that really valuable, really helpful. You have churches outside of Pennsylvania, and unfortunately there are licensing laws in other states that make me not be able to be a resource for them. But for churches in Pennsylvania, I can see someone from Elizabethtown as easily as I can see someone from Butler County. You know, so there's
very
that.
good. So, if a church would have a question though to ask you, is that something that you would be open to if we put in the notes your email or something of that nature?
Yeah. The contact information is just tblackbird@journeytherapy.net. So yeah, I'm very open to that.
Very good. All right. Thank you again. We appreciate the time.
It's good seeing you.
Blessings to you.